And joining us on the line right now is Richard Miniter, New York Times bestselling author. His last book, Leading from Behind, The Reluctant President and the Advisors Who Decide for Him. Richard, good morning. How are you?
Hey, good morning, Brian. Hey, Larry.
All right, as you look at this current situation in Egypt, and you see the president come out yesterday and say that they condemn the violence, but they're not picking sides. They're not going to take a side in all this. What's your assessment of that?
Well, that sounds like a college professor, not a president of the United States. If you look at the actual protests that are going on in Egypt now, they're holding up signs in English protesting the U.S. ambassador, Ann Patchett. Now, it's not a great idea for presidents of countries, certainly not the United States, to remove ambassadors just because, in this particular case, the people of Egypt are unhappy with her. But that said, there are great reasons to remove this ambassador, and saving the lives of Egyptians is just one of them. The more important thing is that many Egyptians, perhaps the majority of Egyptians, believe that the U.S. ambassador in Cairo is too friendly with the Muslim Brotherhood and has called for sanctions and for other economic impediments to the Egyptian economy because of a military coup that, bizarrely enough, was actually popular in Egypt.
Yeah. Richard Miniter, I remember when the first protests, when Morsi was still in power, the first protests, I think they had like 2 million strong out there in Cairo. They all had, a lot of the people had signs with Obama, and that they named this ambassador as part of the problem, right?
That's right. Yeah, and they've been critical of this ambassador for a long time, and it would frankly just makes sense when your interlocutor, the person in the middle, becomes the problem. You replace the person in the middle. I'm not saying there's anything personally wrong with her, although I think the State Department has made a fatal error in working too closely with groups like the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, rather than standing on classic American bipartisan, values of democracy and tolerance and respect for minorities. And by the way, it's probably a good idea to send someone to Egypt as U.S. ambassador who's going to say something about the persecution of that country's 9 million Christians.
Well, we continue to have a position on this administration where they don't want to take a position. They condemn the actions of the military, which, by the way, we have supported for many, many years. But it's the Muslim Brotherhood here who are sort of being the bad actors. I mean, they're the people that are going around burning Christian churches in the middle of these protests. Why is it that you think that the president was reluctant to come out and say something about the actions of the Muslim Brotherhood?
Well, the Muslim Brotherhood is an organization he feels comfortable with. The Muslim Brotherhood is essentially, aside from its radical Islamic roots, is essentially a giant union, right? I mean, there are 24 major unions in Egypt. Almost every profession in Egypt is unionized. Judges are unionized. Journalists are unionized. Virtually all the Egyptian economy is unionized. It's one of the reasons why it has very slow growth, right? Well, of the 24 largest unions in the country, 12 of them are directly controlled by the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood appoints its leaders, and another, 7 or 8 of them have enormous influential blocks of their membership and leadership in the hands of the Muslim Brotherhood. So it's an organization that, and it's able to speak in a very intellectual kind of way. I mean, there are plenty of scholarly articles telling you that there's no one Muslim Brotherhood view, that there's it's a range of views and so on. So if you're a person of the left, the Muslim Brotherhood seems like a familiar kind of organization, institution. But that's the danger that comes from generalizing from a Western European or North American experience into the politics of an Arab country. And in fact, Egypt is just something very different. And the Muslim Brotherhood is something very different, and it's an intellectual and political prejudice and mistake on their part.
Richard Miniter is our guest. He's a New York Times bestselling author. His latest book, Leading from Behind: The Reluctant President and the Advisors Who Decide for Him. You've got a big part of that book about the mission to get Osama bin Laden. You revealed in that book that President Obama delayed and canceled that mission, I think, 3 times. I'm curious, now that we have this revelation from the body man, Reggie Love, this week, that he was playing cards during the mission. We couldn't bear to watch, he said, and he only went down and joined his colleagues there in the Situation Room at the moment of truth. What did you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, the most shocking bit, I think, is when Reggie Love said that Obama told him, quote, "I can't watch the whole thing." First of all, most of it wasn't on video; it was on audio. But second of all, the idea that the President of the United States wouldn't be directly engaged, in this mission that would determine his presidency. I mean, the one thing in President Obama's reelection effort that people of all sides across the American political spectrum agreed with was the killing of bin Laden. And in fact, that was essentially his unofficial campaign slogan: "Bin Laden's dead and General Motors is alive." Right.
Right.
Well, a lot of people had real concerns about the way the president supposedly saved General Motors, but nobody had any doubts about the bin Laden mission. But the more you look at the exact details, when you have the president playing golf with some junior employees from the Department of Energy for most of the morning and early part of the afternoon of the day in which the bin Laden raid went down. And then you have the things leading up to it, as I revealed in my book, Leading from Behind. You've got the cancellation of the mission 3 times at the behest of Valerie Jarrett, his principal advisor and mentor. And you have this effort by Hillary Clinton and Leon Panetta, who was then CIA director, really pushing over a period of many, many months to get bin Laden, to push the intelligence, to put assets on the ground, to target, to prove that the guy in Abbottabad was bin Laden. And you have a very disinterested and cautious, aloof President Obama, unsure of whether or not, sending in a team to kill him was the right thing to do. Now you have the latest about him playing cards during the whole thing. So it's a hugely consequential moment. The good news is he wasn't micromanaging it like Jimmy Carter during Desert One, the failed effort to rescue the Iranian hostages that left 8 Americans dead and never got anywhere near rescuing the hostages. But on the other hand, he's so disengaged, so seemingly unconcerned, it really makes you wonder who's in charge.
Well, Richard Miniter, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to be watching the situation in Egypt, of course, very closely as Friday prayers start to wrap up. It should be a very tense day there. Thanks a lot.